Brian. How you doing?
Fine. How are you?
I'm okay. Are you exhausted? Did you get any sleep?
I got a little bit of sleep, but yeah, it's like a feeling of being hungover without having had anything to drink.
Well, I feel a little hungover, and I did have some things to drink. But let's go. We have a lot to cover. People who are joining us. Hi, Selma Blair. Love you, Selma Blair. People who are joining us have are really interested in kind of getting caught up on everything. And there, I don't even know where to start. But Sarah Gideon just conceded. That's sort of this just in news, Brian.
Yeah.
And gosh, we were just saying somebody said that Josie says hi, by the way. Someone was saying, I will never believe polls again. And I think most people, Brian, are waking up this morning feeling the same thing. What the hell happened with the polls? And I was telling everyone who was here earlier that, I was told time and time again by pollsters that they had fixed the polling system, that they had previously undercounted non-college educated white males, I guess white voters in general, and that they had tinkered with the I guess, the whole way that you do polls, I guess the protocol, I don't even know what you would call it, and that it was fixed. But clearly they were so off again. What is it because, my friend Dave Price said that's because they're asking people things like, hi, do you watch porn? And they're like, no. So,
Soda, and I listen to the opera, and I go to bed at 9:30.
yeah, exactly. So, well, really, seriously, what happened?
Well, we don't know yet, is the honest answer. There's a crisis in the polling industry, and this affected, district-wide polls in congressional districts across the country. It affected individual states, and obviously it was reflected in the national results and the divergence between them and what we saw in the polling. And so we're going to have to pick through that. I mean, one little clue, by the way, if we want to trust yet another poll, Public Opinion Strategies, which is a very well-respected Republican firm, did a poll after the election, and they found a significant chunk of people who were the so-called silent Trump voters, who didn't want to admit to pollsters that they were backing the president. And that may have played a role undercounting rural or non-college educated whites. And then I would say one other factor, COVID may have thrown polling into flux, because you don't normally vote early, voting early. Once you've already voted, it's very well known that people don't respond to polling, or they're more enthusiastic to say that they've participated in a way that's disproportionate to the actual results. The bottom line is we're going to have to pick through this. Nobody kind of fully understands the massive polling failure that we saw.
We kept hearing about the silent Trump voters. And I think when I asked Nate Silver about that, Brian, he said, well, there's silent Biden voters too, who feel like they shouldn't admit if they live in a heavy red or pro-Trump district that they are voting for Joe Biden. But I'm just not sure. And how do you check for honesty when you're asking people questions? I mean, Adriana and Carrie did a lot of phone banking, and when they asked who people were supporting, they didn't want to say. So I also think people are want to protect their privacy in one way or another. And John Molnar just said, R.I.P. Nate Silver. I don't think so. I mean, but it wasn't. Nate doesn't do he just aggregates and analyzes the polls, Molnar. So I don't think that's necessarily true, but really the polling industry is going to have to really take a look at itself.
And these human intuitions about not wanting to share private information, that was true over many decades in which polling was quite accurate and reliable. So I'm not sure that, all of a sudden we've fundamentally changed as people, and therefore polls are all garbage. I think there was a kind of a flaw in the polling that we have to, analyze and understand. And it's really too soon to tell yet. And I don't think we should kind of jump to premature conclusions. That's a big question that ought to be investigated.
Yeah.
But, one thing I would say is, Joe Biden has a significant national lead. I mean, right now I'm looking at my screen right now. It's about 3 million votes. That could stretch to 6 or 7 million votes by the time everything is counted.
That in the popular vote?
In the popular vote. Yeah, I mean, in other countries, if someone wins by 6 or 7 million votes, they get the chance to implement their agenda, which Biden probably won't. And we can talk about that in a little bit.
Talk about that in a moment, but it is interesting, I mean, we don't have to go on a tangent about this, but Eric Holder tweeted about getting rid of the Electoral College, which I wonder if it will ever be discussed. I mean, it always kind of surfaces after an election, but then it goes away. But I think there's a better and better understanding about how racially tinged the Electoral College is. I don't want to go into the whole thing, and I am not an expert on it, but I know there have been a lot of articles about how it emanated from slavery. But we can talk about that in a minute. Let's get to the, huh?
Can I just say one quick thing about that?
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about, the changes and the challenges that Democrats have to grapple with. One thing the Republican Party still has to grapple with, they have won the popular vote for president one time, just once, since 1988, and that was in 2004. And it is a kind of a failure of our democracy that the Senate is as it is, that, the presidency is as it is, but it is not a sustainable business model to lose the popular vote, election after election after election. Ultimately, that can and will catch up with you. And I think, by the way, this year, I mean, I think Joe Biden's going to win, just to, get my bottom line out there pretty quickly.
And by the way, I understand from John Oliver, one of my great news sources, that a lot of states are kind of implicitly saying they're kind of in this loose agreement saying that they will give their Electoral College votes over under certain circumstances. Have you heard about that, Brian? It's kind of a
thing called the Electoral College Compact. A number of states that want to get rid of it have basically adopted the position that they're going to go with the winner of the popular vote, no matter who carried their states. I'm not sure that that's really going to be implemented in practice. I mean, are a bunch of Democratic states really going to support Donald Trump and go against the will of the people of their states? I highly doubt it. I think the whole system has to change in order for, individual states to overturn the popular will.
Okay, well, let's talk, you say you believe Joe Biden is going to win this election. Let's just quickly go state by state. Arizona hasn't been called for Joe Biden yet, has it?
Well, Fox has called it.
Well, I know, but why have the other networks?
I think the AP has called it. Last I checked, the AP has called it. There was a bit of an issue where the exit pollster, Edison, may have yet again another polling failure, may have slightly undercounted the Trump vote in Arizona, which was one of the factors that led to Fox and I believe the AP making that call. So the president's allies are saying that Arizona is still in play. A number of people I trust who, are quants in Arizona believe that Biden is still on track to win Arizona. So let's assume that Arizona goes the way I think it will go. Biden's leads in Michigan and Wisconsin seem insurmountable, and therefore Trump will not be able to hit 270, even if he runs the table on everything else, because Biden won Nebraska too, because I believe Biden won Arizona. You add Michigan and Wisconsin, Biden does not need Pennsylvania. He does not need Georgia. He does not need North Carolina.
What about Nevada? What's going on in Nevada, Brian?
The guru of Nevada, John Ralston,
right,
believes that Biden is on track for a narrow win. But, Nevada is a state I know very well. Half my family's from there. And there are a lot of non-college educated, Trumpy white voters in Nevada, and people tend to forget that. And so I think that's one factor making it a bit closer than anticipated. Another factor is that, a lot of the Democratic organizing and get out the vote is basically run by the culinary workers, who are the folks who work at the hotels in Clark County, which is Las Vegas. And that organizing is really person to person. It can't quite be replicated digitally. And
right.
So, the Nevada State Party had a huge challenge getting their souls to the polls, as they say, under these circumstances with COVID.
Yeah. Someone said it's really rude to call someone non-college educated. Um, I'm not sure.
I mean, I think that's just an accurate description. I think one of the huge divides in this country politically, and I'm not making a normative judgment about people who are better or worse or whatever. I'm just saying there is a gulf between people who have a 4-year college degree and people who don't, which is to say people with some college or people with no college. And, we have to be better as a country in figuring out a path to economic opportunity for everybody. But the fact remains that politically, the preferences and choices of the non-college graduate group are profoundly different than the college graduate group. And we can't really in our country without, describing that.
Yeah. Let me, I'm trying to be receptive to some of the comments, and I appreciate if you guys kind of keep comments respectful and polite, because maybe we can start here respecting each other and not calling names and making value judgments on other people, because I don't know about you, it's exhausting and demoralizing. But Brian, let me ask you about I wanted to ask you about Latinos and the Latino vote in Nevada. I know it has a strong Latino vote there. Miami-Dade really underperformed with Latinos for Joe Biden. He did much worse than Hillary Clinton did in 2016 in Miami-Dade. The socialism message and accusing Joe Biden of being a socialist, or being too far left, seemed to really hurt him. And I'm curious if in Nevada there were some difficulties with the Latino vote there as well.
There is some evidence that with younger Latino men, as well as with some younger Black men, Trump overperformed versus 4 years ago. And that's one of the things we're going to have to pick through, because the early waves of the exit polling, yet another poll we're relying on, tend to be a little bit unreliable. That we need to wait for the pollsters behind that to kind of weigh those results, adjust them based on actual raw votes that are coming in. So we're probably not going to know for a couple of days exactly how Biden performed versus Hillary among all these demographic groups. But it does seem like Trump made some inroads among younger Latino and Black men.
That would be a very interesting kind of exercise, a psychological profile about what attracted these voters to Donald Trump and the way he conducts himself, the language he uses. I mean, friends of mine described it as toxic masculinity. I'm not sure if that has some kind of attraction for some voters. Who knows? But let's talk about, so Nevada, you're saying is extremely tight, but you think it will go for Biden, or you're not going to say that yet?
Nevada?
Yeah.
I think it's going to go for Biden, because I think the swing county, which is the area around Reno, seems to be leaning toward Biden, and that's usually a pretty good tell of where the overall state is headed. So if I had to bet, I'd bet on Nevada going to Biden. To your earlier point, Katie, one hypothesis about these younger voters of color, younger male voters of color, goes back to the education gap we were talking about a minute. These voters are also, some college or no college, overwhelmingly. And so maybe there is a commonality culturally among white and non-white voters with similar levels of education. And that has to be explored and investigated.
Yeah. I mean, I've long said that some of these elections, I think, and the bifurcation media and society, and this whole inability of us to be critical thinkers and really look at information. And then, I mean, it's complicated. We're fed information that affirms our biases, and often those aren't factual stories, and everything is seen through a lens. But, I think that we've lost our ability in many cases to be truly critical thinkers with so many different news outlets pouring in information, and not even news outlets, information coming from so many sources. Okay, sorry, I won't go on about that, but we're talking, so we've done Nevada and Arizona. Let's talk about Wisconsin, because I know it's razor thin there, 20,000 votes, as I said earlier. And I understand that Trump campaign chairman has already said that, oh, 2 seconds. Adrian is helping me with some information that's coming in, but that he wants to, he's demanding a recount, the campaign, the head of the campaign, or tell us about that. Have you heard that?
I heard that. Biden's margin is now about 21,000 votes. I think it's going to grow and not shrink. Scott Walker, who was the Republican governor of Wisconsin, I think was pretty honest about the unlikelihood of a recount shifting that many votes, especially when, you still have some remaining votes coming in from Milwaukee County, from Dane County, which are, overwhelmingly Democratic. When you have evidence that in a number of the swing and collar counties around the cities, Biden is outperforming Hillary at kind of just the level he needs. State. So I'm quite confident that that's going to hold.
That Wisconsin will hold. And Adriana just showed me something. The margin for recount needs to be less than 1%, and Trump will have to pay $3 million for the recount unless the margin is less than 1/4%.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think it's 25 basis points, if you will, or 1/4%. I think it's going to be bigger than that. I mean, right now it's a little over 0.5 point, and I think that's going to grow slightly.
So you think that it will make it difficult to demand a recount under that
He might demand it. He might have to pay for it. I just think it's highly unlikely with that kind of a margin that it's going to be overturned.
Okay. All right. So we've just discussed Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and those 3 states you believe will hold for Joe Biden, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Let's go on to Michigan. Tell us.
So Michigan, the margin is wider. Biden's leading by almost a full point. And if you look at Wayne County, which is Detroit, and
Detroit, and I just want to mention not only Detroit, but the suburbs of Detroit, which is chock-a-block full of those college-educated white suburban women who have abandoned Trump in droves. So we're talking about, like, I have a friend who lives in a suburb of
right outside, Oakland.
And I'm trying to where she lives. I just had a brain fart, and I can't remember where one of my best friends growing up lives. It begins with an M. Anyway, if anybody lives near Detroit in a nice suburb, tell me, because that's where my friend Sarah lives. But I think that Joe Biden has done incredibly well with that contingent, and it sounds like there are a lot of votes that have not been counted from not only Detroit, which should go heavily for Biden, but these suburbs, correct?
I think that's right. I think more of the votes that have yet to be counted are actually in Detroit itself. Wayne County is historically kind of the slowest in Michigan, actually getting results out there. And so right now you kind of look around these suburbs, and it's like 98% of the vote in, 98% of the vote in, and they're relatively smaller. You go to Wayne, which is bigger, and you still have almost 20% of the vote yet to be counted, and Biden's winning that by at least 2-1. So I expect his margin is going to grow, not shrink. He's already leading by a point. I think Michigan's pretty much done, and I think the question is going to be for Senator Gary Peters of Michigan.
Yes, it's in a defeat, 92%. The race between John James, the Republican, Gary Peters, the Democrat, 92% vote of the voting is in, and it's a dead tie.
Yeah, I mean, Gary Peters is up by like 1,000 votes, amazingly close. But again, I expect that to grow as the final 20% of Wayne is counted. So I think Gary Peters is just going to barely eke out a re-election. But, you know, James did extraordinarily well, and he's an African-American Republican and probably has a bright future.
Yeah, Donald Trump just tweeted at 1:43, wow, it looks like Michigan has now found the ballots necessary to keep a wonderful young man, John James, out of the U.S. Senate. What a terrible thing is happening.
You know, can we talk about this for a second? They are not finding ballots. They are counting ballots. They are not finding ballots. This is just a big lie that he keeps repeating over and over again. In close presidential elections throughout our history, the results have not been known until the next day or 2 days later or even a few weeks later. And no major party candidate in our history before Donald Trump has tried to discredit our democracy with these lies about finding votes before. This is incredibly toxic and destructive.
Brian froze for a second, everybody. Hold on.
I broke my phone because I was so.
But it is. I'm glad you called him on that. I mean, you're right. And sometimes it just kind of like you read things and it seeps into your consciousness, and it's really grossly. I mean, it's disgusting. I think you're right. But by the way, I mean, has been his MO for 4 years. Sowing mistrust in the media, so no one can really discern fact from fiction, and now just sowing distrust in our whole democratic system. So, you know, I'm glad you called him on that. But anyway, let's move on, Brian, because I know everybody wants to hear about some other states. But just to recap, you are saying that basically Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan, you believe will go to Joe Biden.
Based on everything I know now, unless there's some huge surprise, I think all 4 of those states will go to Joe Biden, and that would provide him the 270 electoral votes that he needs, and he would be elected president.
It's interesting because we'll talk about Pennsylvania in a moment, but it would be 269, but because of the 2nd Congressional District of Omaha, which is so, you know, janky and weird that they have that.
Yeah.
Him one electoral college vote, and he was declared the winner in that area, Omaha, where my mom grew up. That gives him the 270.
Yeah, I wonder how quickly the Republicans who control the state of Nebraska are going to get rid of that, if indeed that one electoral vote is decisive. Because, of course, without that, all the Nebraska electoral votes would have just gone to Trump, and we'd have been stuck, assuming that Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia go for Trump, which I don't assume, by the way, but assuming they do, we'd have been stuck at a 269 tie, which, as we discussed last night, would have thrown it to the House and would have actually resulted in a Trump victory, because it's based on congressional delegations, state delegations, not who's in the majority.
By the way, we just should point out, I think CNN just called Wisconsin for Joe Biden. And so, according to my followers, I'm trusting you all since you're paying attention to all of this. So Pennsylvania, let's discuss Pennsylvania. And by the way, I think Wisconsin, we were waiting for those votes coming out of Milwaukee that Charlie Sykes was talking about, right? Which is heavily Democratic, to come in. Madison, obviously overwhelmingly Democratic. So let's talk about Pennsylvania. Last time I checked, Biden was significantly behind Trump in Pennsylvania. But, you know, of course, these all important mail-in ballots they only start counting them right on election day, correct?
I think in Pennsylvania, it's election night. And by the way, if your viewers are upset about the slow count and wonder why these states aren't more like Florida and Ohio, you know, counting their absentees as they come in, you can blame the Republican legislatures in those states because, you know, when COVID hit, Democrats saw this problem coming. They submitted legislation to try to change the counting procedures. And the Republicans in all 3 of these places did not go along. And I suspect it's because Trump did not want them to go along, because Trump wanted the appearance of a lead you know, the morning after the election.
Well,
And I think being in Pennsylvania,
but that just isn't how it works, ladies and gentlemen. So it was just asinine that he made that statement at the White House last night, as if he, by, executive order, he could stop votes from being counted. It's so absurd, really, when you think about it. And, it also totally makes sense that most people who did mail-in ballots were people who were who took COVID's more seriously. They were about going to the polls. They didn't want to expose themselves. And so they did mail-in ballots. And so most of the people who are taking COVID more seriously are Democrats, correct?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a correlation between taking COVID seriously and voting for Joe Biden. And so you are seeing a significant Democratic overperformance among the early voters. And in the early vote getting counted last in these states because it's considered absentee, and they didn't start counting until either the day of the election or the evening of the election. And so, at first glance, Pennsylvania looks like a significant Trump victory because he's up now like 400,000 votes, 8 points. But look,
how many, and does that include early voting?
What includes a little bit of early voting, but not
all early voting. Because if you went in person and you voted with a ballot, just as if you went on November 3rd, are those early voting in-person votes currently in the count?
I don't think so. I think most of them are not currently in the count.
Oh.
I think are considered absentee and are therefore counted with the absentees. That's my understanding.
Oh, okay.
And these rules are complicated. And I actually think it varies county by county. What I do know is in Philadelphia, for example, which is the heart of Democratic Pennsylvania, Philadelphia County, which Biden is winning 77-21, 40% of the vote has yet to be counted. And so, Biden is getting like he's netting about 300,000 votes based on what he has now in Philadelphia. If you think he's going to get another 200,000 or 250,000 out of Philadelphia as a net gain, well, on its own, that dramatically cuts Trump's lead. Okay, around to some of these other places, Montgomery County, outside of Philadelphia, there's a significant, which Biden is winning 2-1. There's a significant chunk of vote still outstanding. Allegheny, which is on the other side of the state, which is Pittsburgh, historically that's been a swing county, but Biden's winning it by more than 10 points, and a quarter of that vote has yet to come in. So there is no doubt that this is going to get dramatically closer in Pennsylvania. The is Biden able to overtake Trump's lead?
Really? Most of the president's support coming from Western Pennsylvania. And the question is, will Philadelphia and even, I guess, some areas in Pittsburgh, right? And has Pittsburgh been counted?
Yeah, so Allegheny, which is Pittsburgh, is in the middle of being counted, and about a quarter of that vote has yet to come in. And so, Biden's leading by about 10 points, as I said. And so I think, you're going to see a significant net of Biden votes coming out of Allegheny. Carville had a famous expression to describe Pennsylvania. He'd worked a number of races there. He said it's Philadelphia on one side, Pittsburgh on the other, and Alabama in between. That's kind of true. So you look at the center of Pennsylvania, you look all over Pennsylvania, you get counties like, Potter County, I'm just picking a random one, in the north of Pennsylvania. Not that many people. I mean, I think you're going to get a total of about 10,000 votes there. But Trump is bringing it 80-20, 4-1.
Hey, Brian, by the way, one of my nice followers pointed out, and I'm not sure if this is right, even though I do trust you guys, but I just want to verify that Pennsylvania didn't have in-person early voting.
I think what Pennsylvania had was the ability to drop off your early vote at
Really,
places
but
to go in.
yeah,
Yeah, you don't go in and vote early. I think, but Pennsylvania's got a rich history of election day voting.
right.
This huge absentee thing is new to Pennsylvania. And so I think that's part of why the count is slow. They're kind of grappling with this big change. But yeah, when I hear early vote in Pennsylvania, that's kind of what I'm imagining.
Got it. Hey, wait, I was going to ask you something else, Brian, and now how many how many mail-in ballots are there in Pennsylvania? I've been confused about that number. I've heard 3 million. I've heard 2.6. I listened to the Secretary of State. Thank you guys. We know that Wisconsin was projected for Biden, but thank you very, very much for letting me know. But how many mail-in ballots do we know? Because to me, that if the majority of those are for Joe Biden, it helps us understand if it's going to counteract or not the president's support in Western Pennsylvania.
I think the last I checked, it was about half. About half the state was early. And so, right now we're seeing, almost 6 million votes. So that would be about 3 million, as you were suggesting, Katie. We'll have to tabulate it again once, Philadelphia and the suburbs of Philadelphia fully come in. We just don't have enough information to kind of make a final count yet.
Got it. And Adriana, what were you showing me about per AP, Trump campaign files suit in Michigan to halt vote count, claiming it was denied access to observe opening of ballots. I mean, how many of these legal challenges do you think we're going to see? Oh, and we'll touch on Georgia, Jason, in just a second. And I like that Jason said, can't y'all touch on Georgia? We'll definitely Georgia. My dad was from Georgia. I used to live in Atlanta. My dad went to Mercer. He grew up in Dublin. And he wrote for the Atlanta Constitution. So we will talk about Georgia. But let's talk about these legal challenges.
To use that again. So you want to talk about the lawsuits?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting legal development in that the Trump campaign is pursuing kind of opposite strategies depending on whether they're ahead or behind. That is, in Arizona, they want to count all the votes. They want to, they think that votes are being undercounted. In Michigan, they think that votes are being overcounted and they want to stop the counting. So it's they're trying to win, and they're trying to go to court and adopt kind of rules and procedures depending on the state to, advantage their client.
Well, by the way, Brian, given the fact that so many judges have been named under the Trump administration, right? I mean, he has, I don't know the exact number. Maybe you do, Mr. Brainiac. How many judges have been appointed by President Trump and the administration?
The federal bench, it's a lot.
Yeah. So is that going to have an impact on the decisions that are made given these legal challenges?
Well, hysterically, Freudian slip. Historically, it shouldn't so much because, states run these elections. So federal judges generally would not have jurisdiction unless there's a major kind of equal protection criticism, that is that, voters are being treated differently under the law and therefore the federal government needs to step in. But I think these things are going to go to state court for the most part, not to federal court. And so the Trump judges would not be.
By the way, it's 194. Is that what we saw? 194 federal judges. So, okay. So, but I think they both assembled these big legal teams, right, Brian, that are going to, kind of be David Boies and Ted
Olson
on steroids was Bush v. Gore in 2000. So,
yeah.
Oh, apparently Trump is fundraising like crazy right now for legal fees. So he wouldn't personally pay.
Election Protection Fund as well, by the way. It's called the Biden Fight Fund.
Okay. All right, great. All right, let's talk about Georgia real quick for my friends in the peach state. Is that what it is?
Your rendition of Georgia on my mind now. You didn't want to do it last night, but I was really hoping for that at some point.
Georgia. the whole day through. That's all. I can't sing, but I always try to sing. All right, let's talk about Georgia. Fulton County, DeKalb County, Atlanta. That's the county that includes Atlanta and suburban Atlanta. I know this because I used to live in Atlanta and in Ansley Park in a house that was divided up in 4 apartments. But anyway,
They say, yeah.
what are we thinking about Georgia? Is that seem to be? I know that it's according to the New York Times, Washington Post right now, Trump is considered ahead.
Yeah, I mean it's close though. I mean, Trump is ahead by about 80,000 votes.
Uh-huh.
Still have significant chunks of Atlanta yet to be called. So you move around the state and you look at the Trump areas and you kind of think, yeah, those are mostly counted 98%, 100%, 99%. But then you go to, Chatham, which is Savannah, which is, Biden's winning by 13 points, 20 vote there yet to be counted.
How many counted? Sorry.
Vote yet to be counted there. I think most significantly,
you were blocked when you were saying that. Tell me again.
So you go to Chatham, which is Savannah.
Right.
Biden is winning by about 13 points, and about a fifth of the vote hasn't been counted there yet. But most significantly, you go to DeKalb, which is a big chunk of Atlanta.
Right.
And Biden's winning that 83-15, a 70-point margin.
Mm-hmm.
And 15% of that yet to be counted. Fulton is you've got a chunk of Cobb, which used to be kind of Republican, white collar suburbs of Atlanta, and Biden's now winning that by 13 points, and you've got about 10% of that yet to be counted. I think the change in Atlanta, the fact that it resembles, Virginia now more than South Carolina, is pretty striking and electorally quite significant in that you have these metro areas and the suburbs immediately surrounding them, moving significantly to the Democrats. I mean, you have Newt Gingrich's old congressional seat being represented by a moderate Democratic African-American woman. So that gives you, a sense of the scale of the change. And the fact that Georgia, which was on no one's mind a couple of weeks, I'm just going to milk that one to death. Oh God, yeah, here all week, folks. Try the
bill.
Yeah. I think that's quite significant because if Georgia becomes, a swing state, that provides Democrats other paths out of the industrial Midwest. It's gotten a lot shakier for Democrats.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, just so what are you saying when push comes to shove? You still believe that Joe Biden could pull it off in Georgia?
He could. It's going to be very tight one way or the other. I mean, the votes that are coming in are mostly Biden votes. Whether Biden can net like 100,000 votes, which is about what he needs, I think is yet to be determined. We just don't know yet. But
share with you this tweet from Amy Siskind, who is
Politico.
She works for Politico. So Amy just tweeted, per the New York Times, 200,000 ballots left to be counted in left-leaning areas of metropolitan Atlanta, and Trump's lead is down to 85,700. So clearly, if many of those 200,000 votes are for Biden, he could make up the deficit, correct?
He could. And wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, I don't think anyone had on their bingo card losing Florida by 3, losing Ohio by 8, and winning Georgia. But, these coalitions shift and change with each election cycle.
Real quickly, because people are probably getting tired of us at this point. But
tired of me.
I could do this all day. But, Mike Allen put out a piece for Axios that said Donald Trump, no matter what happens, is the big winner. He's going to be more powerful than ever and a leading contender for 2024, just when everyone thought it was safe to go out. I'm kidding. But, I guess the question is, I mean, what do you think of that assessment?
Well, I think it's half right. If he loses the presidency, he is not more powerful than ever. He is vastly less powerful than he is right now. I mean, the number one goal of the Democratic Party was to get Donald Trump out of the White House, and it looks like Joe Biden has succeeded in doing that. But yeah, Trump and Trumpism, just as importantly, are not going anywhere. My friend Mike Murphy, who foresees a civil war for the future of the Republican Party, I think may be sorely disappointed. I think that war may be over before it started.
You mean basically it is the party of Trump. It is the party of Trumpism. There's nobody really. I mean, what, a handful of people voting, fighting on the other side, like Mitt Romney and Jeff Flake, who's out of there. I mean, who represents the moderate Republicans in the Republican Party today?
Even conservative, or even the conservative Republicans, the non-Trump Republicans. I think you have a profound divide between some elite Republicans who have worked and served in government and the vast majority of Republican voters. I mean, you have never seen in the history of this country the degree to which leading Republicans defected to support Joe Biden in this election. This has never happened before. It was like half of George W. Bush's cabinet, a whole bunch of, retired Republican senators and governors, leading voices like Cindy McCain. And yet that seems to have had very little impact on what Republican voters actually wanted. And so I don't think you're going to see Trump getting dislodged in any way from atop the kind of Republican power structure in this country. And even if it isn't Trump in 2024, and it may be, but even if it isn't, it's going to be somebody who appeals to the Trump wing of the party, which is most of the party.
Right. Hey, I think a lot of people, do you want to do that? I don't know. I think we're done with moles. It is interesting. I'll just bring it up because Adriana found this. Nate Silver is saying when all is said and done, he still thinks that polling will fall along the same 3% margin of error as in 2016. He said to me that polls are looking at the popular vote, but the issue is understanding where those voters live and where those voters will count. What does that mean? Where those votes will count?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the state-by-state polling should not have been as off.
Yeah.
There were really good polls that had Biden winning Wisconsin by 10. He's going to be lucky to win Wisconsin by 1. I'll take, responsibility for our polls. I mean, I'm not a pollster, but we worked with really good pollsters in Florida to try to dislodge Trump there. And we never had Biden behind. We had him bouncing between a 1 and a 3-point lead. One time we even had him at a 5-point lead. We never had him -3. So that's a little bit beyond the margin of error, particularly if it's, poll after poll after poll showing one thing and the results being significantly different. One thing I will say, which may not have been measured in some of these polls, is that for the voters who decided in the last few days, just as in 2016, we saw a kind of a surge of more conservative-leaning voters kind of coming home to the Republican Party and voting for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And that may explain a bit of this. I'm not excusing all the polling error, but that may be one piece of it.
You and I have had a lot of experience with observing sexism, me experiencing, you observing it. I sort of wonder, do you think that Kamala Harris, among some more conservative voters, just by being female and a person of color, do you think that hurt, on balance, hurt the ticket or helped the ticket by galvanizing Democrats and women?
We don't know enough to know yet. I know that's an unsatisfying answer. I will say that in some of our focus groups in Florida, this Republican line that Biden was a Trojan horse for the left, that it was really going to be President Kamala Harris after a couple of years, that she was the most liberal senator, et cetera, that had some resonance. And we heard that over and over and over again. And so, could you make an argument that if the VP choice were perceived as a less liberal figure, setting aside the racial questions, which I think are real and significant, could that have helped a little bit, made Biden seem a little less threatening to those people? Perhaps. We just don't know yet. We also don't know the extent to which she helped the ticket in terms of color. That just isn't clear yet. It doesn't seem to have helped in Florida.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And, the other thing that I think is interesting is, Molnar, who's my second favorite political analyst, was saying how he thought that if it had been Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren running against Donald Trump, that he interpreted as people, and I don't know if you agree with this, really being nervous about a direction of the country going more towards socialism. Now, I think socialism needs rebranding. The police needs rebranding, that people misunderstand these terms. Something like 52% of young people call themselves socialists, and I don't think they mean like, Stalin socialists. I think they just mean things like universal health care and greater opportunities, educational reform. But I think the term generationally really is triggering for a lot of older people. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I think socialism is a big problem. The perception that there is socialism in the Democratic Party is a huge electoral challenge. If I'm going to rely on a poll again, but this is I think quite good. If you ask people which of these characteristics would make you less likely to support a particular presidential candidate, that the candidate is gay, that the candidate is a woman, that the candidate calls himself or herself a liberal, that the candidate calls himself or herself a socialist, the one that bites the most is socialism, which is why I was always convinced that Bernie would be a deeply problematic and probably failed Democratic presidential nominee, and why I think, Senator Warren, for all her strengths, by going so far left and being perceived as so far left, would get kind of the worst of all worlds. I'm not sure she would have driven more support in communities of color, which are actually more moderate than people sometimes recognize. And she would have, I think, alienated a lot of the white, college-educated suburban voters who have saved the Democratic Party, but are certainly more moderate on economic issues. And so if these voters are a little cross-pressured, where they're totally with the Democratic Party on social issues, with the possible exception of the sort of the new kind of woke cancel culture thing, which is, something we can talk about. But on economic issues, they needed to be reassured over and over and over again that Biden was not going to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000. And they trusted Joe Biden, because he has never been perceived as a radical figure. I think one of the most important statements he made in this election was during the whole kind of contretemps about, chaos and rioting in the streets. Biden stood up and said, do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? No. And of course he didn't. And it was just totally credible. Bernie could not have gotten up and made that statement, even if it were true, even if he does in fact have no sympathy for rioters, because he does look like a radical socialist. Mm-hmm. And so, the Democratic Party has always succeeded when it did two things simultaneously. When it energized its base, particularly communities of color, which are not hard left, and when it reached voters in the middle, swing voters, who over the last several cycles have voted for Bush and Obama and Trump, and it appears that, just enough of them in just enough places swung back to Joe Biden that, by the skin of his teeth in terms of the Electoral College, he's going to be president.
Yeah. People are saying not all socialists are radical. I think, we could do this guy named John Judas for Columbia just wrote a book about socialism. I was going to do something with him either on a podcast, but I'm fascinated with the term and how it's interpreted so differently by different constituencies. Before we go, Brian, and we should talk about cancel culture at some point, and kind of how President Trump was able to weaponize this whole notion of political correctness, which he said again and again on the campaign trail, as he did in 2016. And this cultural kind of conflict between people who want change and believe that we should be a more inclusive society, but and those who may be in the middle and want it too, but they need education. They need to be persuaded. They need to be brought along. And this overreaction and cancel culture, if you don't get it right every time, and feeling like it stifles free speech or even the ability to ask questions so you can be educated or be, learn and grow. I think there's a kind of rigidity on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's right. And 70% of the electorate is still white. And so, the risk when you organize yourself that everybody is in a racial or ethnic group and everyone, has to just defend the interests of their group versus other groups is you drive a lot of white people into that sort of groupthink as well. They start to think, well, we better be in a group. And we better be in a group in opposition to others who we perceive are taking from us. And even though there is systemic racism, even though it is a very positive thing for this country to actually reckon with, generations of theft from Black and brown people, that is a really positive thing. But you've got to do it in a way that doesn't push away the white majority whose votes Democrats desperately need.
I think the natural reflex for some people is to get defensive and to dig in their heels. And I think if we had a safe space to actually talk about some of these things so people could learn and grow, we'd be much better off. Before we go, Brian, I just want to ask you about the Senate races. Some of those were big surprises. We heard, I think I mentioned that Susan Collins has been reelected, that Sarah Gideon conceded, I guess, within the last hour. Jamie didn't perform nearly as well as those damn polls indicated he would, right? Yeah. Lindsey Graham was reelected. Mitch McConnell, which is not a surprise. I think, do you want me to?
I was begging Democratic donors.
One of my really nice followers says, turn the comments off. I think we're okay. You can just kind of ignore them and listen. We're having a lot of conversations about whether Jesus was a socialist. All right, I'll turn them off, you guys, for a little bit, just because, why not? So just real quickly, let's talk about the Senate races before we go. As I mentioned, kind of a surprise. I think Democrats thought the Senate would be flipped, and doesn't look like it. I mean, although they needed 4 and now they're 2. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the Democrats successfully flipped Colorado and Arizona. Alabama, as expected, flipped back.
What was the one we were just talking about? No, not Steve Bullock. That Trump just tweeted about. It was
John James, Michigan.
Michigan.
Michigan. I think people, may pull that out, but we'll see. That's very close. So the Democrats have netted 1 seat at this point. So that would narrow it from 53-47 to 52-48 in favor of the Republicans. And for the Democrats to win a majority, they probably would have to win North Carolina, which is still possible, but looks kind of unlikely. They'd certainly have to hold Michigan, and they'd have to win
and Georgia, a runoff.
At least one of the seats from Georgia. and that would be a 50-50 split, which if Biden becomes president, Vice President Harris would break the tie, and therefore the Democrats would have a majority. So it's not impossible, but I would bet on the.
I think it's pretty unlikely, don't you think?
I think it's pretty unlikely. It's not impossible. I mean, I think, let's see where North Carolina ends up. I think that'll be the big tell. Let's see if Peters can hold on in Michigan, and then it'll come down to Georgia.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before we go? And let us know. I'll put the comments on for a second if you behave. I'm kidding.
Say one thing, which is that since 1932, only 2 elected presidents have been defeated for a second term. It's really hard to beat an incumbent president running for re-election. If you want to count Ford, who was never elected in the first place, you would have 3. And so, Democrats had been to beat Trump, and Democrats thought it would be. It's a big deal to be in. And so if Biden wins a narrow margin than a lot of us expected,
what's going on here either. Oh, it's my hand. Is that what's screwing up? Oh, sorry. My phone is about to run out of juice. Here, I got it. Hey, Brian, thank you. And if you guys, if people are enjoying this, oh, they lost me. People, I think, are enjoying this. If you all want us to do this again, I'm determined to make Brian a big star, everybody. If you guys want us to do this again, can you DM me or just post or just write me something on my Instagram post? And I love talking to Brian. Hi, Josie says hi, by the way, Brian.
Oh, can I say one thing, by the way? A lot of your fans requested to follow me on Instagram, and maybe I'll change my mind, but I basically just use Instagram for family and friends. But if people want to follow
There's Claire. Speaking of family and friends, your wife Claire just said hi. Well, but also you can follow
Twitter. That's where I
say
politics stuff at Goldsmith B.
And
hi, hubby from Claire.
And a lot of people were asking if he's
a lot of people tell Claire. A lot of people are asking if you're single.
Yeah, not single, not ready to mingle. Yeah.
And he's got 2 children, ladies. So back off. If you guys like what you see, subscribe right here.